So Saigo, lastly, would like to introduce Ben Horowitz, the founder of Andreessen Horowitz, and also Rahm Emanuel, the U.S. ambassador to Japan. So thank you very much. Please join.
All right. It's great to have you.
Thank you. As I said a little earlier, today's a big victory. One is I never knew Ben owned a suit. Two is I never knew he knew how to tie a tie. And three, I never knew that he had a button-down shirt. So I see today as a victory on many counts.
Yeah, it's like a holiday. You're the 31st U.S. ambassador to Japan. Before that, you were in Congress. You were Obama's chief of staff. You're mayor of Chicago when Chicago was well run. So broad question and interesting. So I've known you, of course, for many years. And you know, when you became ambassador of Japan, you've kind of been progressively getting more and more bullish on Japan the longer you've been here, I've noticed. And so why is that? What are you kind of most excited about here?
Well, I kind of approached this when I was mayor, early on, about 3 months into it. I asked McKinsey and the former head of the Chicago Fed to, 10 years out, tell me where Chicago is going to be, and then write a plan on how to change that trajectory to our advantage, obviously, and tell me what the things that we have to do, et cetera, et cetera. And I basically narrowed it down to what I called our elevator pitch, 5 T's: talent, training, transportation, technology, and transparency. And that basically, you know, we had more universities in the city of Chicago than any other city except for Boston. Within the 200-mile radius, we had more universities and research universities than any other city in the entire United States. We had, you can get anywhere in the globe, anywhere in the America, based on O'Hare and Midway, multiple times a day, weather permitting. Those from America will understand that joke. But you just go through it. It was the most diversified economy in the entire United States. No sector contributed more than 14% employment. So we doubled down on all our strengths and then turned some of our challenges into opportunities for investment, et cetera. End result, 7 consecutive years in the city of Chicago. Chicago was #1 for corporate relocation and #1 for foreign direct investment every year for 7 straight years. And it was based on this plan. So I kind of, you know, when I got here, I started looking around. And Japan, I would say, here are the strengths. There's liabilities, there's challenges, there's nowhere in the globe you can go that aren't. Highly educated workforce, higher than the norm across the globe, and especially the developed world, with great universities that continue to produce great graduates, great research universities, not just colleges, but research universities, an incredibly modern infrastructure. You can get anywhere in the fastest growing region of the world multiple times a day. Its major city is incredibly safe, incredibly clean, incredibly well organized, and incredibly affordable when you compare it on any basis. As I said, modern infrastructure. You have, and you and I talked about this many times, across the globe, one of the most important resources that people see growing importance, an abundance of fresh water. Japan is used to scarcity. It's the only city in the globe and any country in the globe that is not experiencing a drought and hasn't in the last 20 years. Yeah. And I can go through the rule, and then ultimately in this part of the world, it's a country that the rule of law is the arbiter. Those are huge strategic advantages. And lastly and finally, a massive amount of capital on the sidelines. Massive, ready to deploy in many productive areas.
Why do you think it is on the sidelines? Well, it really is on the sidelines.
This is for other experts. I know I've only been here 19 months. For many people in Japan, it feels like 19 years. But I think there's been an overcorrection in the lessons from the bubble bursting. And if we have too much risk in our system, Japan has too little risk in its system and too little appetite for risk. But I think you can see the major strategic changes in that mindset, and it's building on itself.
And do you think, I guess, what are your observations with Prime Minister Kishida-san and his administration? Do you think that has the potential to change?
What do you mean on the potential?
Well,
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, the kind of view
But
of
yes
risk.
is my answer.
Yeah.
Okay, but what do you think by that?
Well, so, you know, that there's a great risk in reaction to the bubble of
Right.
the kind of fairly distant bubble. But now you have a new administration, you've got a new prime minister, new ideas, a new direction. Do you think that can catalyze a cultural change and reignite investment in the country?
Well, first of all, I think you can see, just take a look at the amount of young men and women who are graduating Tokyo U that are going into being entrepreneurs. That would not have happened 10 or 15 years ago. That's just like one benchmark. If anything, you wouldn't have done this 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago, this program.
Yeah.
Last week was with Larry Fink, and they brought in over a couple $1 trillion in the 5 major sovereign wealth funds that were here.
Yeah.
I mean, I tell this as an anecdote, a joke, but it's also telling. When I first get here, beyond COVID, it was hard to get Americans here. I had a dinner with John Gray, the CEO of Blackstone. The next morning, I had breakfast with Ken Griffin from Citadel. And I had a lunch with the head of Guggenheim, Mark Walters. There's all, and then I'm missing one other one I can't quite remember. All within 48 hours. Now, you would think I would be heavier than I am, given the amount of meals I just said, but that tells you where people have paid attention. The other thing I would just say, as an illustration of our earlier point, and this is where I think the Prime Minister and the government and the Bank of Japan, everybody's moving. And I spent, as we joke, I mean, I spent my bulk of my life in public service, but 2 different stints as an investment banker. Our capitalism in the United States is fund-driven capitalism. We have private equity funds, venture funds, mutual funds, debt funds. It's a fund-driven capitalism with a lot more appetite for risk. In Japan, their capitalism is banks, insurance company, and pension funds. A different risk appetite given its institutional versus, now, both have strengths, both have vulnerabilities and weaknesses, and the regulatory process should be appropriately designed for that. I do think the system in Japan is both, 1, internally changing, and 2, externally inviting change in bringing a little more of the fund type of both resources and mindset to the economy. It may not be moving as fast as it should. On the other hand, it's clearly way different than it was just 3 years ago based on everything I know. And 3 years probably not the right benchmark given COVID, but where it was 5 or 7 years ago.
Yeah, interesting. So you're, for many reasons, very close to President Biden through multiple administrations. What's your view of the relationship between President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida-san?
Very close, and I think always, I get confirmed, and I was about to leave, and in early January they had a bilat down in the Situation Room on the video. Mm-hmm. The president's been here twice, the prime minister, both Camp David, and otherwise been in Washington twice. And I would just say to you, they talk to each other, they refer to each other as Joe and Fumio. So they're on a first name basis. Yeah. Well, that's a sign. Yeah. That's a sign of something, especially. It's a sign of comfortability, and I think they understand each other. And I think the president appreciates the fact that the prime minister, on a number of different times at different places, first country to divert LNG to Europe during the war, even before the war starts, is Japan. That there's been many things that the president has personally asked, the prime minister has done. You build up trust. And I think the best example was in Japan's interest. If you have trust, nation to nation, leader to leader, you don't do the bare minimum, you kind of stretch yourself. And the results of Camp David both Prime Minister Kishida, the President of the United States, President Yoon are okay. They didn't do the minimum to get to that based on history.
Yeah.
You got to have a trust in who you're interlocking with, and that you're going to do things based, you know this is hard, here are the politics, you're going to cover each other's back. And I think that tells, those are reflections and manifestations of a good working relationship. And at multiple levels below the leader, you have inherent trust and good working relationship across the board.
Yeah, interesting. And so,
plus an incredible U.S. ambassador to Japan.
yeah, amazing.
I mean, that goes without saying.
Amazing.
You don't have to applaud. My mother did that for you. No.
So one thing, the one thing I do know about
The whole goal is to get him off his game. That's the whole goal of this interview.
So there's one thing
Yeah.
that you Democrats and those Republicans seem to agree on in Washington. And as far as I can tell, it's the only thing, is that from an industrial policy standpoint, you know, it's strategically important to not have such a large dependency on China post-COVID. And does that represent an opportunity for Japan to have a different kind of relationship with the United States and U.S. companies?
100%.
Yeah.
But it's all, look, I've written this, and I don't like saying, let me say what I've said before, but let me say what I said before. 3 C's have changed the world, and we're never going back. COVID, conflict, and coercion. Those have fundamentally changed every presumption. Japan increasing its defense budget, COVID, conflict, and coercion. Yeah. Japan deciding to get counterstrike. Japan deciding to adopt the CFIUS law on incoming investment from a strategic perspective. The United States CHIP Act, the IRA, the infrastructure bill, all could be understood through COVID, conflict, and coercion. And so what has happened is an evaluation based on the importance of strategic assets, of how you're going to, where you can rely on allies and friends. And the third thing I would say, I don't buy we're just going to snap back to where we were 10 years ago, or B, there's the end of globalization. That's just not true. There's 3 things that are happening that I think are fundamentally going to rewrite international economic relationships and statecraft. Where cost and efficiency used to drive the world, political stability and economic sustainability will now drive. You are not putting an investment where you don't trust that government rule of law. Just not going to do it. You're not going to do it capital expenditure. Second, energy is not a resource, it's a strategic asset. Fundamental different way of viewing it. Third, we used to measure things by how much you sell. Now you measure it by how much data you collect. And every company, Honeywell, JP Morgan, Eli Lilly, they're a data company that sells either a pharmaceutical product, a manufacturing product, or a financial instrument. But they are fundamentally a data company. And that, to me, is how now things get. Now, there may be more things. Those are the 3 things I can identify.
And how does that affect, like, how does the United States government see that through the lens of its partnerships? So if everything is a data company, then what does that mean for you know, what we let be sold here, what I'm allowed to invest in overseas, these kinds of things?
One is we want to, with our allies, write the data rules. You don't want some other country to write them that doesn't have our interests. Imagine if the internet wasn't somewhat a United States invention. The rules on the internet would be a lot different than they are today.
Yep.
Yeah.
No doubt. Yeah. Interesting. So as countries and companies seek to kind of build resilience and reduce the cost of these interdependencies and these policies change, what are the opportunities that you see for Japan and the United States? And like, what do you see as the kind of most revolutionary projects?
Well, a lot of people, first of all, are in the first stage of just security, making sure that their country, on semiconductors and minerals that go into it, you're not replacing the vulnerabilities of the Mideast for the vulnerabilities of China on energy. What I would also, but give you example like a liability that's a real strength for Japan in my view. Okay, so Japan about 20 years before everybody else started to experience population loss or decline.
Yeah.
And they had to look at the future. So where's the technology in the future that Japan's a leader in, way ahead of everybody else? Robotics. Now,
Yeah.
the United States, we're going to need robotics. Europe, they're declining they're going to need robotics. Where's your number one ally, which is a leader, if you're going to keep the economies growing, the GDP growing, and deal with a scarcity of issue? You're going to need robotics in all hosts of things, and Japan's a leader because, I don't want to say it like this, but to make the point, they got there first. And they made a problem into a strategic strength. And there's a series of things, as the rest of the world gets older, Japan's elder population that lives much longer can tell you a lot about what type of healthcare is needed, but also what type of preventive healthcare earlier in life is needed. And so they have a head start in a very important space.
Interesting. And is there any...
That was 2 interestings by Ben. I want the record to show that.
Do you think that, I'm going to throw him off his head. Do you think that population decline is a one-way door, a one-way trend, or can it be reversed?
Well, look, there are people that study this that forgot more than I'll say.
Yeah.
But I've done a cursory read. The only family planning that's ever worked was a restrictive one in China.
Yeah.
Nobody has bribed families into having more children. And when you study it, which I have...
But what about the baby boomers?
That wasn't exactly a family planning strategy. That was a post-World War II strategy that families took onto their own.
Oh, so they did that themselves.
Yeah. Well, can I tell?
Yeah.
Is there press in the room? I better not tell this joke. No, not. When we walk off, I'll tell you this story. Well, let me say, I'll get in trouble. What do I care? It was being ambassador, it was a fun run while it happened. During the '95 government shutdown, you were called non-essential. You were sent home in the Clinton White House, and so non-essential was sent home. It was a 3-week government shutdown. If you go out 9 months later, 7 Clinton White House staffers all had children. And so I would like to say more work got done during the government shutdown than we ever get credit for. So here's the thing. I mean, you can't encourage, you can do the right policies, okay? You can do the right things to encourage families and to support a 2-wage earner home and to help parents balance work and home. But the idea that you're going to purely by those incentivize people to have more kids, it's very, very difficult and has rarely, I don't want to say never, but really succeeded. I do think the opportunity is in immigration and smart immigration reform, but that's, a sovereign country has to make their own decisions. And we have to figure that out too in the United States.
Okay, so to summarize, if we want to reverse Japan's population decline, we need to have a government shutdown.
I don't recommend it be one of America's great exports, okay?
All right, good. Well, I have run us out of time, but I just want to...
This is like going to the dentist's office. Great.
Yeah. I would love to thank Ambassador Emanuel. We're so thrilled to have you. This has been great, and we're all incredibly excited about the future of Japan, and thank you for your service in building the relationship between our countries.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.